other options that are out there, and then just open it up for discussion and talk about some ways to maybe be able to take advantage of some of these other ingredients that are out there. If you look at the first slide there, ethanol, everybody's heard about it, of course. Ethanol is the primary driver behind some of these elevated grain prices, because basically you've got another industry there that's competing with you for corn. And corn being the primary grain source that's being used to make ethanol. Of course, you can make ethanol from some other grains, but for the time being, corn is the most efficient. Now, it doesn't matter if you have 10 sows, 10,000 sows. The big question is, how will you respond to some of the dynamics that's going on in the market with respect to grains? Now, if you look over the last couple of years, I haven't checked the board today, but corn is actually below $4 a bushel right now in the Midwest. Now, by the time you add freight and everything, corn's still probably in the mid-4s here in North Carolina, but compared to where it was at $7 and $8 a bushel, it's a lot better. But however, you go back a couple of years ago when you could buy corn for $2, $2 1/4, $2.50 a bushel, it makes quite a bit of difference with respect to overall feed costs. If we look at the second slide, I list out ingredients. There's basically three types. You got traditional, which is like corn, soybean meal, wheat, barley, fish meals, different things like that that are traditional ingredients. Then you have what's called traditional alternatives, which we'll go into a little more detail on. But the one thing I want to bring your attention to are some of the things called non-traditional alternatives. This really come about because of the run-up in grain prices, causing people to think outside the box on some other ingredients that are out there. The only problem is a lot of these suppliers of these non-traditional alternatives, at one time they were giving the stuff away just to get rid of it. Well, of course, as things get value, what happens is you actually have to pay more and more for it. But relative to corn, for instance, there's actually still some value left there. So if you look at the third slide, which is mainly corn, this falls under the traditional one, there are several different types of corn. Of course, there's a lot of different corns coming along that are more designer corns. They are genetically modified, whether they're what they call triple stack, which are resistant to like rootworm. They're also Roundup ready, but there are other types of corn, such as high oil corn, high lysine corn, that can be used. So some of these different types of corn do not really lend themselves well to making ethanol. Like a high oil corn has less starch in it. Well, starch is what you need to ferment to make the ethanol. If we look at the next slide, when you're looking at alternative ingredients, any ingredient out there, the thing that it's priced relative to is corn. I don't care if it can even be fat, animal fat, as an energy source. A lot of this stuff is priced relative to corn. And as a nutritionist, what we do when we look at fat and different grains, we always price them relative to each other. And there's always a certain point at which you add more of one of the ingredients in or remove some. And fat's a good example of that. We use a rule of thumb of about 4 to 1 price of fat versus corn on a per ton basis to whether or not we reduce or eliminate fat from the formulas. But that, like I said, mainly is just to say that all your alternative ingredients are priced relative to corn. Wheat's not really a big issue here, although a couple of months ago there was wheat available, but now since corn has dropped, wheat doesn't fit formulas for the most part anymore. Then your next slide, traditional alternative ingredients. Now everybody's heard about the distiller grains. Of course, when you take the corn, the ethanol plants make the ethanol, what's left over, the waste product, is distiller grains, or our distiller grains. Distiller grains work fine. We use them every day in swine nutrition. And what all it is the corn after it's been ground, and they introduce bacteria to it. to basically eat the starch, and in the waste product is ethyl alcohol or ethanol. And the nice thing about distillers, because of all the ethanol plants and because of the run-up in the price of oil and people looking at using more ethanol in gasoline blends, there's been a lot of availability of distiller grains. Distiller grains have been used for many, many years, though, but they've been mainly used in the dairy industry. You had whiskey distillers, which would come from Jim Beam or any of your distilleries like that, but now most of your distiller grains are coming from the ethanol side. Some of the nice things to consider when you're looking at whether or not you want to use a product such as distillers, it is a good protein source, and it's very high in phosphorus. Most of you probably know if you grow corn, your fertilizer prices have gone up over the last year because of phosphate. Phosphate, which is made from phosphoric acid, is almost tripled in price. If you look at Monocal, you could buy Monocal a couple of years ago for 16, 17, 18 cents a pound. Now you're paying 50 cents a pound for it in some cases, 50, 60 cents. And it's all because of the phosphoric acid price. There are some problems with distillers. It is not an exact replica of corn, obviously, because you remove a lot of the starch content. It is higher in fat. The only problem with that fat, it also tends to be more unsaturated, which means it's very soft. It's liquid at room temperature. A vegetable oil is unsaturated, whereas like a lard or a beef tallow is very saturated. It means it's solid at room temperature. But the problem with corn oil and distiller grains is it's very soft. Now, pigs are different than cattle. Pigs will mimic exactly what they eat. You've heard the old saying, you are what you eat. Well, pigs are a very good example of that. If you feed a pig a lot of vegetable oil, and this may be an issue with Whole Foods, is the back fat on these pigs become very soft. And bacon becomes very soft. And I've seen pigs that have been fed a lot of either poultry fat, which is very unsaturated, or vegetable oil, where they've actually had to freeze bacon in order to slice it. And your packing companies obviously don't like that. They like to be able to take bacon where it's relatively cool and slice it with a slicer. Or if it's really, really unsaturated, it's like taking a knife and trying to cut very fresh bread. It tears it. So they would have to cool it down and freeze it. Now, there are two different types of distillers. There's wet distillers and there's dry distillers. Of course, in the swine industry, we feed dry distillers. Wet is still primarily used on the ruminant side. And if you go to the next slide, it's just a graph that shows feed disappearance. This was actually some research that we did with a customer of ours. And this goes back about a year and a half ago. They were considering looking at feeding distiller grains in place of some of their corn. And one of the things we cautioned them on are pigs typically do not like high levels of distillers in the formula. Usually up to 10% you're okay. You go beyond that, you will actually decrease intake. And just each one of those points, if you look at the top line, that was just a normal feed made with corn and soybean meal. The bottom line was corn, soybean meal with distiller grains. And each point along an 11-week period of time, the pigs consumed less feed. They also grew slower. So even though it makes the formula a little cheaper, it actually lengthens the amount of time that a pig is on your farm. Now, the next slide, under traditional alternative ingredients, some of these you may already be using. Hominy, corn gluten feed or gluten meal. There's two different products. One's a 60% protein and one's in the roughly 20 range. Then there's bakery byproducts. Now these are fairly available. I've got a customer over in the western part of the state that actually buys the leftover donut mix from a Krispy Kreme factory. So it's got sugar in it, it's got flour in it, works very well for it, and it's got a little bit of fat. And he gets this, at that time when he first started getting it, he was getting it just for the freight. Only thing he had in it is him driving to the factory and getting the product. Only problem